Bascara Karanafar was born in the city of Chenganur in Kerala state, India. From a young age, he emigrated to the United States to build his life. Through decades of diligent work, he not only stabilized his life, but also accumulated considerable wealth. Together with his wife Anama, Bascara had two beloved children, a daughter and a son. By the early 2000s, Radha, his eldest daughter, had become the family's pride. She not only graduated from university with a master's degree, but also had a stable job and a happy marriage. Whenever Bascara spoke of his daughter, his eyes would light up with pride. However, alongside this joy, the father's heart carried a persistent worry. His youngest son, Binu Peter Karanafar, who had just turned 25. Unlike his successful sister, Binu suffered from intellectual disabilities that prevented him from taking care of himself. In daily life, from the simplest tasks, Binu needed guidance and reminders. He was like a grown child, completely dependent on the care of his relatives. By 2011, when he was nearly 60 years old, Bascara and Anama realized that time was pressing them. Their worry about Binu's future grew heavier when they thought about the day when they would no longer be there. Who would take care of this special son? After many sleepless nights of contemplation, they made an important decision: to find a gentle wife for Binu who would become a reliable support for him in the years to come. Early that year, the Bascara couple took Binu back to their homeland of Kerala, India, with a sacred mission: to find a suitable girl to be their son's life partner. Their requirements were surprisingly simple. They didn't need beauty or prestigious background, just health and a kind heart. Most importantly, the girl had to be willing to devote her love to caring for Binu and bear children to continue the Karanafar family line. Not long after, a relative introduced them to a modest family in Pathanapuram city, Kollam district, in the same Kerala state. This family had a daughter named Sharon, only 19 years old, who had just completed high school and was waiting for employment opportunities. Fate seemed predetermined when Sharon's family welcomed this marriage proposal with barely concealed excitement. What pleased them was not only that the Karanafar family didn't demand a dowry, but also the attractive promise: Sharon would receive 140,000 rupees annually on the condition that she must sincerely and devotedly care for and truly want to become Binu's wife. When both families agreed to this marriage, the engagement and wedding ceremonies were held simply. Immediately after, Sharon began a new chapter of her life when she followed her husband's family to settle in the United States. On this distant land, the young girl from Kerala homeland began to familiarize herself with the role of daughter-in-law. In the early days, Sharon appeared to be an obedient bride, always working alongside her mother-in-law Anama, enthusiastically sharing household duties. However, after a year of adaptation, she began to feel that life was monotonous and boring. With a modest tone, Sharon asked her mother-in-law for permission to enroll in a computer course to have more beneficial activities. Anama and Bascara understood their daughter-in-law's state of mind, a young girl in her active years, forced to live in a quiet house beside her special husband. Binu, with his current health condition, couldn't provide deep conversations or moments of connection like normal couples. Therefore, they gladly approved Sharon's request. Just a few months later, Sharon had excellently completed the course and received a certificate. Not stopping there, she was fortunate to be hired as a cashier at a local supermarket. What's noteworthy is that the Karanafar family was completely financially comfortable at this time. They didn't need any additional income. Supporting Sharon to work outside came entirely from the desire to bring new experiences and a more open living space to the young girl. In 2003, the greatest joy came to the family when Sharon gave birth to their daughter, Aishwarya. At that moment, the happiness of the Karanafar lineage seemed perfectly complete. Both of Bascara and Anama's children now had their own families and blessed them with lovely little angels. From here, family life became more vibrant than ever. With life now stable and all children having families, Bascara and Anama began to cherish retirement plans. In his mind, the image of a peaceful house in his homeland gradually became clear. So Bascara decided to buy a plot of land about 1.2 acres in Karyanat village, Chenganur city, Kollam district, the very place where he was born and raised in Kerala state. He dreamed of building a magnificent villa. However, when the villa was completed and ready to welcome its owners, Mrs. Anama suddenly passed away, leaving Bascara and his children and grandchildren in great grief. Faced with the unexpected departure of his beloved wife, Bascara decided to fulfill their last wish by returning to his homeland. He brought Binu, Sharon, and his granddaughter Aishwarya to live in the villa that love had built. To ensure convenient living, he also hired a servant and a driver. Thus, the spacious villa became a common home for 6 members. Not long after, Radha, Bascara's eldest daughter, also decided to leave the United States to return to her homeland. She and her husband and children lived in a house only a few hundred yards from her father's villa, convenient for visiting and family bonding. Although he was 65 years old and officially retired, Bascara still maintained the habit of getting up early and doing many tasks during the day. He even established a real estate development company right in Chenganur city. However, on the morning of November 8, 2009, an unusual incident occurred. Bascara did not leave his room as usual. The house servant, after waking up, noticed that both the front and back doors were unlocked, even though the night before he clearly remembered carefully locking all the doors. Confused and suspicious, he immediately knocked on Sharon's room door to report this strange occurrence. Upon hearing from the servant, Sharon appeared quite calm and suggested that perhaps he had just forgotten. She then went to the kitchen as usual. However, when she reached the dining table, she discovered her father-in-law's breakfast remained untouched. This made Sharon wonder and ask the servant about her father-in-law's whereabouts, why he hadn't eaten breakfast, and whether he had gone to the real estate project. The servant reported that Mr. Bascara had not left his bedroom since early morning. Hearing this, Sharon became worried, thinking that perhaps her father-in-law was having health problems. She hurried toward his bedroom to check the situation. But as soon as she stepped in front of the room door, Sharon suddenly witnessed a strange sight. Dried chili powder was scattered all over the floor in front of her father-in-law's room. With trembling hands, Sharon gently pushed the door and found it opened easily. It turned out not to be locked at all. Inside the room, the scene was even stranger. Dried chili powder particles scattered throughout the floor with much denser concentration than outside. Her eyes turned toward the bed, and she involuntarily shuddered at the sight before her. Bascara lay motionless on the bed, his body stiff and lifeless. The shock was so great that Sharon completely lost her composure. Her panicked screams echoed throughout the villa as she desperately tried to shake and wake her father-in-law. That chaotic sound quickly attracted the attention of the servant and driver. Just seconds later, both ran to the room and witnessed the heartbreaking truth. Their master had passed away forever. In a state of panic, Sharon hurriedly made urgent calls. First, she contacted Radha to inform her of the terrible news about her father. Immediately after, she called the police to report the incident. Subsequently, Bascara Karanafar's body was taken to the hospital for autopsy to determine the cause of death. At the same time, a police team and forensic experts arrived at the villa to conduct crime scene investigation. In the first preliminary examination, the forensic team made notable discoveries about the villa's condition. All entrances and windows remained completely intact, with no signs of damage or vandalism. This ruled out the possibility that intruders had used force to break in. The house's security system was designed quite tightly. Both the front and back main doors had a 2-layer structure. The outer layer was a thick, sturdy wooden door, and inside was an additional iron grill door as a second protective barrier. Similarly, all windows in the villa were equipped with fixed iron grills that couldn't be opened or closed from outside. Regarding personnel, the villa currently had 6 permanent residents: Sharon, father-in-law Bascara, husband Binu, 6-year-old daughter Aishwarya, along with a servant and a driver. However, when collecting testimonies for investigation purposes, police could only work with 3 people who had sufficient cognitive capacity and communication skills. Aishwarya was too young, and Binu, due to his intellectual disability, meant both couldn't provide useful information. Therefore, only 3 people could be questioned: Sharon, the servant, and the driver. During the testimony collection process, each person described what they knew about the night of the incident and the morning when the tragedy was discovered. The servant said he had the duty to check and carefully lock all entrance doors and windows before going to bed. For that night, he was completely certain he had followed the proper procedure, locking the front and back doors before going to his room. However, what confused him was that when he woke up the next morning, he found these doors were only closed but not locked at all. The driver said that the night before, he had gone to bed earlier than his usual routine. In the morning when he woke up, he performed his tasks as usual, having breakfast, then preparing the car for his bosses every day. Everything proceeded normally until Sharon's panicked screams rang out, and only then did he learn that Mr. Bascara was no longer alive. Sharon recounted that she started the morning as usual, but when she realized her father-in-law still hadn't had breakfast, something very unusual for his routine, she became worried. Thinking that perhaps her father-in-law was having health problems, Sharon decided to go to his room to check the situation and then discovered the heartbreaking truth that he had passed away. In her statement to police, Sharon mentioned that some valuable items belonging to her father-in-law had disappeared from the room, including a laptop, wristwatch, personal ring, and wallet. This information initially seemed to support the hypothesis of a robbery. However, when investigators conducted a thorough check of the victim's bedside drawer, they discovered unusual things. This entire area still maintained its neat, orderly condition, completely opposite to what was typically seen in ordinary robbery crime scenes. Thieves usually left traces of rummaging and searching for valuables hastily and carelessly. Even more suspicious was the police discovery in that very drawer of cash, amounting to 9,000 rupees, a not insignificant sum. The question arose, how could a thief overlook such a considerable amount of money while taking other items? Another important clue also made investigators ponder. The Karanafar family kept 2 guard dogs. According to experience, whenever strangers intruded into the area, these dogs would react with strong and prolonged barking. Their barking was usually loud enough for the entire surrounding area to hear. However, throughout the night of the incident, the night Bascara died, these 2 guard dogs remained completely silent, not making any warning sounds. Based on all the clues collected, the detective concluded that if this was truly a robbery, then very likely someone inside the house had cooperated with the perpetrator by unlocking doors so the perpetrator could comfortably enter the house. The perpetrator was also estimated to be someone familiar who regularly visited the Karanafar family home. That's why the guard dogs didn't make noise when they saw the perpetrator. During the expanded investigation, police collected important testimony from a neighbor living right next to the Karanafar family villa. This man was named Raju, and his testimony provided notable clues about the developments on the night of the incident. According to Raju, around 1 a.m. that night, while still awake, he suddenly saw a strange man standing right in front of Mr. Bascara's gate. Seeing the suspicious situation, a stranger appearing at such a late hour, Raju decided to approach to investigate. He directly asked the person what he was doing there at midnight. The stranger gave an explanation that he was on his way home when his motorcycle broke down, forcing him to stop. This man asked Raju if he knew of any motorcycle taxis or rickshaws operating nearby to help him move the broken motorcycle. Raju, with kindness, called a friend who had a motorized rickshaw for assistance. Not long after, the rickshaw arrived and the stranger left the area with his motorcycle being towed. However, when the incident of Bascara Karanafar's death was discovered the next morning, the details in Raju's testimony suddenly became extremely suspicious. The timing of the stranger's appearance, right on the night the tragedy occurred, along with the reason for being there, made investigators suspect that this was very likely the perpetrator or at least one of the accomplices in this murder case. The next day, on November 9th, 2009, the autopsy results for Bascara Karanafar were announced, in which the doctor concluded that this 65-year-old man did not die of natural causes. There were 8 thin wounds on his neck caused by fingernails. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation from an object resembling fabric or a towel. According to the forensic doctor's conclusion, the direct cause of death was suffocation due to strangulation. However, what was notable was that in the victim's mouth area, experts discovered traces of chloroform, a powerful anesthetic. This proved that before being killed, Bascara had been rendered unconscious with anesthesia, possibly to limit his ability to resist. Based on the decomposition state of the corpse, along with other forensic signs, the doctor estimated the time of death occurred around midnight during the transition period between November 7th and November 8th, 2009. When combining the autopsy results with all the clues and evidence collected at the scene, the detectives reached an important conclusion. Bascara Karanafar was not the victim of a simple robbery, but the victim of a carefully calculated murder. The perpetrator had intentionally created the appearance of a robbery to cover up the true motive and mislead the investigation. From here, the search for truth was intensified with high concentration aimed at identifying the killer's identity and motive. While investigation activities were being vigorously conducted, important information was supplemented by the victim's family. Radha, Bascara's eldest daughter, proactively came to the police station to share her concerns about Sharon, her sister-in-law. Radha revealed that just one day before the tragedy occurred, her father had anxious conversations with her. Mr. Bascara admitted to his daughter that he was having bad premonitions about his personal safety. Specifically, he expressed fear that Sharon, the daughter-in-law he once trusted, might kill him. Information from Radha made the police's initial suspicions clearer, because from the early days of investigation, they had noticed many contradictions in Sharon's testimony. One of the clearest inconsistencies lay in how she described the sequence of events on the morning the body was discovered. According to Sharon's testimony, she woke up as usual, then met the servant and went straight to the kitchen. Only after seeing her father-in-law's breakfast still untouched did she decide to go up to check his room and discover the tragedy. However, this testimony completely contradicted what the servant had reported to police. According to him, before reporting about the unlocked doors, he had directly informed Sharon that Mr. Bascara had not yet left his bedroom. To better understand this contradiction, it's necessary to understand the villa's structure. The building had 2 floors with clear layout. The ground floor housed Bascara's bedroom. Right next to it was the room Sharon used for rest. The upper floor contained Binu's room, Aishwarya's room, along with the rest areas for the servant and driver. A notable detail was that Sharon chose to use the ground floor living room as her sleeping place instead of staying with Binu, her husband. This meant her room was only a few steps away from her father-in-law's room. With such spatial layout, a logical question arose. If the servant had knocked on Sharon's room door and informed her that her father-in-law hadn't left his room, why didn't she go straight to check, when his room was only a few steps away? Instead, why did Sharon claim she had gone to the kitchen first? This choice was not geographically logical and didn't match the natural reaction of a worried daughter-in-law. To investigate deeper, detectives conducted a covert investigation into the mobile phone activities of everyone present in the villa that night. Results showed that the testimonies of the servant and driver were completely credible. After dinner, both their phones had no activity, consistent with their statements about going to bed early. Conversely, Sharon's phone showed a completely different picture. Her device was active continuously throughout the night with dense call frequency, dozens of calls to and from the same phone number. When traced, police discovered this number was registered under the name Basit Ali. The mounting evidence was sufficient for investigators to make an important decision. On November 12, 2009, exactly 4 days after discovering Bascara's body, Chenganur City Police conducted the arrest of Sharon Karanafar. She was taken to the station for questioning in a separate room. A month later, police arrested 3 men who were subsequently identified as Sharon's accomplices. They were Basit Ali, Sanu Rashid, and Nitin. Going back in time to 2011, when Bascara and Anama decided to marry their youngest son Binu to Sharon, the young girl from a modest family whom they trusted would become a devoted life partner. After the wedding in Kerala, Sharon followed her husband to the United States to begin a new chapter of her life. There, with good English skills and a sociable personality, Sharon quickly found work as a cashier at a local supermarket. The job not only provided income, but also opened opportunities for her to interact with a broader social environment. From new friendships, Sharon gradually became invited to participate in recreational activities outside. Initially just small gatherings, but gradually these activities escalated to parties at nightclubs. In this environment, Sharon began to become familiar with and gradually accustomed to alcohol. The change in their daughter-in-law's lifestyle couldn't be hidden from Bascara and Anima. They had repeatedly tried to gently and patiently advise Sharon, hoping she would realize and return to traditional family values. However, all the sincere advice from her parents-in-law had no effect. Sharon completely ignored it and continued on her own path. Not only that, but even the most basic responsibilities of a wife and mother were also neglected by Sharon. She showed no concern for caring for Binu, her husband with special circumstances who needed support. Even with her daughter Aishwarya, Sharon left it to grandmother Anima to handle most of the child-rearing until she passed away. Anima's death should have been a shock to help Sharon wake up and realize her responsibilities to the family. However, instead of maturing and taking on the role of the woman of the house, she became even more comfortable frequenting entertainment venues outside. Not having her mother-in-law's watchful eyes and advice gave Sharon more conditions to live according to her personal desires. The situation became increasingly serious when Bascara began receiving disturbing information from reliable sources. He was reported that his daughter-in-law had inappropriate relationships with other men. When Bascara threatened consequences for improper behavior, Sharon showed no repentance or shame. Instead, when he threatened to cut the annual allowance, she reacted with an even more shocking counter-threat. Sharon declared that if Bascara didn't transfer all family assets to Binu's name, she would divorce and abandon her husband and child. This threat put Bascara in a dilemma. On one side was anger at his daughter-in-law's disrespectful attitude, on the other was fear about Binu's future, if Sharon carried out her threat. Finally, love for his special son forced him to accept a painful agreement. This agreement had clear content. Sharon committed to change, focusing on caring for Binu and daughter Aishwarya as a true wife and mother. In return, Bascara had to transfer all family wealth to Binu's name. To show sincerity in this agreement, on December 4, 2008, Bascara officially drafted a will leaving all assets to Binu. After completing legal procedures, the family of 3 returned to Kerala, India, to settle in the villa he had prepared for his elderly years. However, Bascara was not yet ready to retire completely. Besides spending precious time with his granddaughter Aishwarya, he decided to establish a company specializing in developing real estate projects in Chenganur city. To manage this new business, Bascara found a young partner named Basit Ali. This 24-year-old was highly regarded by him and given full authority to manage construction activities in real estate projects. Due to the nature of the work, Basit frequently visited Bascara's villa to report progress and discuss project-related issues. During these visits, he had the opportunity to meet Sharon, his boss's daughter-in-law. Over time, the relationship between these two gradually developed beyond normal social boundaries. Basit's visits were no longer purely for business purposes. Instead, he seemed to be seeking opportunities to meet and exchange privately with Sharon. This change in motivation and frequency of visits couldn't avoid the attention of those around. Bascara, with experience from dealing with Sharon in the United States, knew his daughter-in-law's character well. He knew she had tendencies to seek relationships outside marriage. Therefore, when sensing similar signs recurring in the current house, he began to have serious concerns. To verify his suspicions, Bascara decided to hire someone to secretly monitor activities at the villa when he was absent. Results from the person assigned this task confirmed his worst fears. Basit Ali frequently visited the house when Bascara wasn't present, and the purpose was clearly to meet Sharon. When discovering this, Bascara wasn't surprised at all. In fact, he had anticipated the possibility of this situation occurring very early. From January 24, 2009, just a few weeks after the family returned to India, Bascara had secretly met with a lawyer to modify his will. Everything had been carefully planned by him, preparing for the worst possible scenarios. In his long-term plan, Bascara had made a decision requiring Radha, his eldest daughter, to leave the United States to return to Kerala, India. This was not an impulsive decision, but part of a plan he had calculated carefully. In private conversations with Radha, Bascara shared his entire future plan. He was confident that with his current health, he could live about 15 more years. According to this calculation, when he died, Aishwarya would have reached age 21, mature enough to understand and manage assets. Then, all wealth would be divided equally between Radha and Aishwarya, while Sharon would not receive a single penny. Father and daughter also discussed the worst-case scenario in detail. If Bascara died earlier than expected, when Aishwarya wasn't yet of age, all assets would temporarily belong to Radha. Later, when his granddaughter turned 21, Radha would transfer half the assets to her granddaughter. Bascara also specifically asked his daughter to take responsibility for caring for Binu if Sharon decided to leave the family in the future. With the plan clearly outlined, daily life at the villa continued as normal. Bascara maintained a calm attitude, acting as if he was completely unaware of his daughter-in-law's wrongdoings. This restraint allowed him to observe and gather more evidence without making Sharon suspicious. Conversely, Sharon became increasingly reckless and careless. Perhaps believing she had won after the will agreement, she began to openly display her relationship with Basit Ali more boldly. Meetings were no longer carefully concealed as before, and she seemed no longer worried about being discovered. The relationship between Sharon and Basit had exceeded the boundaries of an ordinary extramarital affair. They began to have serious plans for a future together, dreaming of a life no longer bound by family or social rules. However, to turn their dream into reality, they realized they needed to deal with Bascara, the obstacle on the path to their happiness. In this entire drama, Binu, Sharon's legal husband, due to his health condition, was completely unable to perceive what was happening around him. Sharon eventually couldn't hide her ambition. She suggested to Basit that the only way they could live together and seize all the assets was to eliminate Bascara. This cruel idea was immediately embraced by Basit. Not stopping there, he also recruited two friends, Sanu Rashid, 21 years old, and Nitin, 25 years old, to participate in the plan. On the afternoon of November 7th, 2009, when returning home, Bascara unexpectedly caught Basit in the room with Sharon. A fierce argument erupted between father-in-law and daughter-in-law. In anger, Bascara declared he would soon arrange for Binu to divorce Sharon and find a much better wife for his poor son. Immediately after, he left to visit Radha, his eldest daughter, to tell the truth and express his frustration. However, as soon as Bascara stepped out the door, Sharon and Basit decided to act that very night. Basit immediately went to meet Sanu and Nitin to discuss details, while Sharon stayed home to prepare dinner for the entire family. That meal, unknown to anyone, had been secretly spiked with sleeping pills. That evening, Bascara returned but didn't join dinner. He quietly walked straight to his room and closed the door. Meanwhile, other members of the household soon fell into deep sleep, including the servant and driver. Sharon didn't forget an important detail. She mixed sleeping pills into the food of the two guard dogs. And because of this, that night, they were completely silent, not barking when strangers appeared. About a few hours later, Basit along with Sanu and Nitin approached the villa. Sharon had quietly unlocked the main door so accomplices could easily enter, but the outer iron gate remained locked from inside. So Basit and Sanu had to climb over the wall, while Nitin was assigned to stand outside and keep watch. Right at this moment, Raju, the neighbor living next door, happened to see Nitin wandering nearby. When questioned, Nitin made up a story that his motorcycle had just broken down and he was waiting for someone to help. But the truth was, at that very moment, inside the house, Basit, Sanu, and Sharon were preparing to execute the plan to murder Bascara. Basit and Sanu Rashid entered through the kitchen door, where Sharon was waiting, and immediately led the two men to her father-in-law's room. As soon as all three were in Bascara's room, Sanu pressed a cloth doused with chloroform to the victim's mouth. But Bascara suddenly woke up and resisted. Sanu quickly strangled Bascara with his hands, but he continued struggling. Then Basit quickly grabbed a towel to strangle the victim's neck, while Sanu moved down to the lower body and pressed Bascara's legs to stop his resistance. Not long after, Bascara began to fall silent and motionless. Immediately after Bascara stopped breathing, Sharon rushed down to the kitchen, grabbed a handful of dried chili powder and scattered it everywhere, on the floor, on the bed, even covering the motionless body of her father-in-law. This tactic was to mask human scent, so that later the guard dogs couldn't trace Bassett and Sanu's tracks. When finished, Sharon collected all of Bascara's valuable items, from watch and ring to laptop, and gave them to Bassett. Then she calmly returned to her room, while the two men quietly left the scene. Just a few hours later, when dawn was breaking, Sharon stepped outside and began her clumsy act, pretending to be shocked when discovering her father-in-law was dead, as if she had just learned of the incident. However, from the very first hours, police realized this didn't look like a robbery at all. Too many unusual details appeared in the villa, and suspicion toward Sharon grew higher when Radha, the victim's eldest daughter, proactively approached police. She detailed her sister-in-law's suspicious behaviors throughout the time, while also revealing the final conversation between her and her unfortunate father. On November 12, 2009, Sharon was officially arrested by Chenganur City Police. From examining the call history on this 28-year-old woman's phone, investigators quickly traced Basit, Sanu, and Nitin. At that time, all three were hiding in Mangalore City in Karnataka state. Not long after, they were found staying in a luxury hotel in Bengaluru. When police raided, all three managed to escape in time. It wasn't until December 13, 2009, after more than a month of hiding, that Basit Ali, Nitin, and Sanu Rashid were arrested in Kolar village, also in Karnataka state. When all perpetrators were caught, their confessions matched the forensic evidence and autopsy results. Police clearly identified each person's role in the conspiracy to murder Bascara Karanafar. The case file was completed at lightning speed. 6 months later, on June 11, 2010, the trial officially opened. Just a month and a half later, at the end of July 2010, the Court of First Instance sentenced all four defendants to life imprisonment: Sharon, Basit Ali, Nitin, and Sanu Rashid. Sharon and her three accomplices were not satisfied and appealed. However, the appeal was quickly rejected, and the original sentence was upheld. Sharon continued trying to get a reduced sentence through appealing to the Supreme Court, this time changing her confession. According to Sharon, that night she did invite Basit Ali to the house, but she was completely unaware that Basit and his two accomplices had a plan to kill her father-in-law. The Supreme Court completely disbelieved this confession, so Sharon failed again, and the original sentence was upheld. After no more legal measures could be taken, Sharon began serving her sentence in prison. And that's the case for today. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.